Welcome to the Occult Rejects. We are two former secret society members who were determined to show the public the truth that occultism has been purposely integrated into every aspect of society, from politics to music, Hollywood, and science. This is used to manipulate the public as a whole and to protect the fake elite. The symbols are used all around us to affect world events and public perception, our behavior, and even our future. We will translate the occult so that you have eyes to see. We reject their agenda to give you the tools to save yourself. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Occult Rejects with your host Lux and
Patriot.
And today, whoa, do we have a good one for you?
Definitely good. Definitely interesting. So,
yeah,
it's probably like 100 rabbit holes to go through.
Right. I was, and it's a bit different than other stuff that we've done. It's a bit more deep, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think the great thing about it though is it's totally different from what we've done, but it still, in my opinion, ties back to occultism.
Oh, absolutely. And
hence why it's on our show.
Right. and I think that one thing that I find really fascinating about this subject is that I've seen researchers who have been doing this for a very long time, much longer than I have. Some guys who've been doing research for 20 years, and they haven't even heard about the subject that we're going to talk about today. And it's a pretty unknown operation or project or from the CIA, and it definitely includes occultism and a lot of different subjects that I guess would be considered paranormal. And so today we're going to be covering the Gateway Experience and the CIA involvement with it.
One thing I did want to say though is I think though that the good thing about mentioning occultism connected to this is that I would even think some people, unless they were really into occultism, probably wouldn't even notice the connections.
Right.
At all. Like I see it and you see it because we've practiced it and we actually know the specific practices that are suggested in occultism. So I think this might even be a little eye-opening for some people to actually see exactly like what are some occult practices also.
Yeah, certainly. And that the CIA was and probably still is actively researching the occult in a very scientific way. And they are drawing conclusions of sort of how modern science is confirming the occult. Just the occult calls it something slightly different because, these terms that the occult uses is hundreds, if not thousands of years old. So as the CIA sort of researches it, they're vindicating it or validating it. And you're seeing things that are described in occult literature appear in the documents. So it's very, very interesting.
It's funny. What I used to tell some people that my opinion of magic is when science and spirituality connect.
Yeah.
Because I do believe there is an actual science behind it also.
Right. And I think that it's probably a lost science. I think that at one time...
I think that's part of the occultism is actually explaining it.
Right. And, that peoples long ago probably had a very good understanding of the occult, and to them it was a science and still continues,
Exactly.
But one thing that, and we'll get kind of more into it later, is I'm very interested now to kind of wonder where it is that these people so long ago who were writing the early documents, the Hebrews that were describing Kabbalah, how they received that information. Because they talk about it in the documents too, and it seems like the Hebrews were pretty right.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that I noticed that I was just like, wow, this just connects so much to occultism.
So
I don't mean to take you off track.
I was just going to say to a lot of people who maybe are not too familiar with the CIA, and they would say, well, what in the world would the CIA have any interest in this type of stuff? Isn't the CIA researching terrorism? Aren't they, hunting down international drug smugglers? Yeah, they are, but they are also in very interested in other subjects, and it's important to remember kind of how the CIA started, and they came out of the Operation Paperclip, which I'm sure um, some of our viewers might have heard about before, which was just essentially the United States government after World War II began to recruit Japanese scientists along with German scientists to work on certain projects. So it's a dark fact of American history, but we definitely did recruit Nazi scientists and Japanese scientists who were really bad guys. And the research that they were doing in World War II, the Japanese and the Germans, revolved a lot around sort of torture, mind control, psychological investigations. A lot of our medical breakthroughs came that we have now. A lot of them are a result of some of the things that we learned because of the experiments that were done during World War II. But so essentially, the United States government takes a bunch of these scientists and they give them exemption, and they pretty much tell them to report to Fort Detrick in Maryland and to start doing research on sarin gas and other chemicals. And around the same time, so we're talking about the 50s. LSD is discovered in Switzerland, and you know, sort of before the CIA got the name CIA, they were called the OSS, and the CIA really wanted to kind of become their own entity because they wanted to do research about explicitly mind control. And so they did a couple of these early projects, such as like Operation Sea Spray and Bluebird. And then eventually, because of the success that they had in those projects, the US government was like, yep, let's form a CIA. And the CIA is formed, and with the express goal of mind control. So it is important to remember that as the CIA was being founded, sure, they had been doing research and other stuff, but they were very interested in mind control. And one of the early first projects you have is Project MK Ultra. Well, its original name is MK Naomi, and they were trying to figure out how that they could control people's minds. So,
That's interesting.
so the subjects that we'll talk about today, you can certainly see why the CIA was interested in it and wanted to learn more. So, yeah, we're talking about Operation. Well, it's not even Operation, but it's
Not even yet.
Gateway Experience, and the Gateway Experience was started by a gentleman by the name of Robert Monroe. So essentially, he was doing this research. The CIA was interested, but Mr. Monroe, who started the Gateway Experience, he's got a pretty interesting history.
Definitely.
So he was born in 1915, and he had this guy. He was really interested in sort of like human consciousness and research on out of body experiences. But his early life, he was really involved with the NAA, so the National Aeronautic Association. He went to Ohio State and he studied pre-med. He was really interested in broadcasting and got involved. I think he even bought a couple different broadcast stations and things like that. So
he was one of the founders of the Jefferson Cable Corporation.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean that's a pretty big deal.
They even credit him for being for coming up with the term out of body experience, OBE.
And that all started because of his kind of weird experiences that he was having when he was researching sleep learning. So he was saying that he thought it was possible that you could learn a lot of information in a very short amount of time just by sort of listening to information as you were sleeping. But then he had what he claimed was the first out of body experience for him, right?
Yes.
And that was in '58, and he described it as, he was doing this sleep learning, and he got paralysis, and he started to sense all of this weird vibration and bright light, and he talks about in his book the journey out of the body.
So now that happened in when? In 1958, you said?
Yeah.
All right. So then I just want to read these two things. So now prior to 1958, this guy in 1953, they had Monroe formed RAM Enterprises, a corporation that produced network radio programs, and they had as many as 28 programs monthly already.
Yeah.
And then in 1956, they created a research and development division to study the effects of various sound patterns on human consciousness, including the sleep state.
Hmm.
Monroe was especially attracted to the concept of sleep learning. So, I mean, that just shows, I mean, look how much stuff what I find weird is that this guy was into broadcasting also.
Right.
And then
And,
is associated with studying with specific sounds on human consciousness.
sure. And frequencies and
Yeah.
um, f- frequency vibration is really important to the occult, and I would say it's one of the natural laws, the law of vibration.
Oh, yeah.
So, vibration, deeply occulted stuff. So he's already researching that, and also involved in broadcasting at the same time, which is curious.
Uh, I'd have to be totally honest with you. If you didn't think of the law of vibration in some other simple way, I don't even think you could even believe in practicing ritual magic. Like
Yeah,
I couldn't see like if even some sort of small concept version of that, some basic idea of that, how you would even justify it even really working at all.
right. I mean, during rituals, vibration is such an important part.
Yeah.
And I would even be able to notice that certain times in certain rituals where you remember we could be able to get that vibration down perfectly, vibrating
Yes,
God,
yeah.
and it's like you can, if there's a sensation that happens, there's something.
It almost feels like you're in tune with something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So after he kind of did all of those things, he went on to form the Monroe Institute. And he formed that in, I think it was '85. I'm not sure, but either way, no, it was started in '62, and then it moved
Yeah,
to
that was Monroe Industries. Yep, you started in 62 in Virginia.
right, because it wasn't the Monroe Institute yet; it was
Industries.
Industries. So,
Now, at that time in 1962, was the CIA also in Virginia?
well, they were definitely in Fort Detrick, which is not far. That's in Maryland. And while okay, so during that time period, of sort of like the late '50s, we're getting into the earlier '60s. The CIA was doing the MK Ultra experiments at Fort Detrick, and they were essentially exposing people to copious amounts of LSD, and they would kind of do a lot of research similar to what Monroe was doing by exposing them to vibrations. Or honestly, I would say that MK Ultra as a CIA operation was more torture, though. I
Oh
mean, they were
yeah, I think it
some
was a lot harder on people than this thing is, for sure.
right. They were,
Psychologically and physically, yeah.
yeah. They were really kind of stretching the boundaries to see when the human mind would break, or
Mhm.
what was
Mhm.
behind the human mind. I mean, they were doing some really
Yeah,
twisted.
exactly. Exactly. It's the best way to say it, I think.
Yeah. Um, and so yeah, he goes on. Starts the Monroe Institute, and he develops a system that he thinks is, really effective of sort of doing this sleep learning or expanding and exploring human consciousness with these different frequencies. And the way that he even built this program was that he brought a bunch of different people from um, uh, different expertise together, and that's how they sort of built the Gateway Experience, with a bunch of people, perfected it, learned what worked and what didn't, and then that's sort of after that's when they started the institute, because they realized what they were doing was very effective. So, and what they were doing were these out of body experiences where people would try to go into past lives, maybe go into different times, different, past, present, future, learn from their past lives, altered states of consciousness, and a lot of it was, hypnosis based. A lot of it was you were being exposed to various frequencies in one left ear, but yet in the right ear you're being exposed to another frequency. And they developed what they called hemisync, which was figuring out how to allow the information that was being presented to the listener past the left hand side of the brain, because the left hand side of the brain filters out a lot of things that to the right hand side. So they wanted to figure out how to bridge that gap and make it so that the information that the participant was listening to was entering into the right hand side of the brain, which is more of the subconscious side of the brain, right?
Yeah.
It's less of the analytical side of the brain. The left is the analytical side of the brain.
I remember even reading like through the documents and stuff, or whatever it was. I think there was might have been either an assessment or maybe it was something a doctor had said, that it seems like at some point somehow people started kind of like whatever they didn't quite understand, whatever was like normally right side brain thinking, the left side of the brain started to come up with its own ideas of deciphering that, basically. you
Yeah,
know because you're not really in your right hand side of the brain that much, so now it's going to have to go to the left, and once it goes to the left, that's just going to kind of make up whatever it can really think of to make sense, even, and it could be completely off, really.
exactly, right, because it's trying to analyze it.
And it's trying to analyze something it has nothing, it doesn't really understand at all.
And to me, the whole left hand, right hand side of the brain,
All goes back to
this,
occultism.
oh my goodness, right?
Yeah, all
I
does.
mean, that's
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 exactly what it's all about to me.
right. I mean, to occultists out there who are listening, this is the analogy of balance, yin and yang, the the alchemical process of trying to perfect the man, so that you are essentially bringing both sides of your brain together and having harmony or unity. Um, Essentially, I would say, is the occultist, one of their main goal of an occultist is hemisync. It's just called something else.
Tiferet.
Yep. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Right. Because the basic theory is that when you're living in one side of the brain without there being unity between the two, then you are off balance. So, um, they really perfected this hemisync, uh, the technology and the research that they were doing, to the point that in 1978, the U.S. military evaluated the Monroe Institute. So they were curious about what Monroe was doing. The CIA, of course, probably had its ears up because they were doing MK Ultra type research. So in 1978, the military evaluates the Monroe Institute, and that was done by the Department of the Army.
Now, maybe I'm wrong, but didn't they kind of just find out about it and just like kind of just inserted somebody in there? Like that's what I almost got out of like how they even did the review.
So yeah, they initially evaluated it by kind of, I'm guessing, sending officers there for the OBE training, They did that in 78, and then in 83, they did it again and sent even more officers to the Monroe Institute to undergo the hemisync type of training.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first analysis, it was almost kind of like, yeah, just try to get in there and tell us what happens.
Right. So, and they definitely were doing that to try and figure out if it was bunk, if it was kind of phony, if it was maybe a cult, if it was real at all in 78. But in 83, when they sent officers again, that is when they wrote the analysis and assessment of the Gateway process. So this is the Department of Defense, the military, the Department of the Army, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command out of Fort Meade in Maryland. They were sending people to the Monroe Institute, go to this training. They figured out this is legit. And they said, well, we need to write an analysis of this. We need to break this down and explain what's happening here. Because they would continue to research, the CIA would, and Department of Army, etc. They would continue to research this for decades, and they would go on to use it for decades as well, for various different things that had different project names. But the most important thing I would say about the legitimacy of the Gateway experience is the analysis and the assessment of what the CIA and the Department of the Army said. Because again, this isn't us kind of telling you that we think maybe this is real or something. Again, this is the CIA.
The government's saying it's real.
Right. This is their analysis of it.
Oh, before we get into that, I just want to read something that I had that I thought was interesting about the hemisync thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're saying that they got involved in 83, right?
The military?
Yeah.
They claim in 78.
Oh, 78. Okay, that's what it was. In 1975, at that point, Monroe had already registered a first of a bunch of patents concerning the audio techniques that are used in the hemisync thing, which is basically what the CIA went to go check up on. This is that's basically his program, and it already had a trademarked brand name by then, and they had it was like pretty much already an established thing at that point.
Yeah, and they were doing out-of-body experiences in the Gateway experience already before the CIA and the Department of the Army even got there.
The more advanced stuff, I think, near the end of the hemisync manual on the tapes, I think is different versions of I think like remote viewing, and like one of them is remote viewing by an out-of-body experience.
Right, and yeah,
I think that's like one of the more advanced parts of this would be that.
Yeah, and Monroe, if you go back and hear sort of how he talked about those last stages of the out-of-body experience, and using remote viewing to travel through time and space, or even outside of time and space. The goal in the Monroe Institute was to learn things about yourself in order to become a more perfected.
You're totally right. Yeah, it does state that.
Yeah. And then the CIA was like, wait, you said what? You can travel through time and space?
Say what?
Say what? So yeah, they sent a bunch of their guys there, and they researched the living hell out of it, and then they wrote a very long and I would say thorough analysis of it in 1983. And the United States public would not see these documents at all. It's unaware that these type of operations were even going on until its release in 2003.
20 years later.
yeah. So I guess it would probably be. It'd be cool to start to kind of get into what does that document say? What does the CIA, Department of Defense, Army document say about Gateway?
Yeah, they say a whole lot about it actually, and they seem to agree with that it works by far.
Right. And the person who was the guy who was responsible for doing the analysis of this was Wayne M. McDonald. and he was the commander of the U.S. Army Operational Group in Fort Meade.
And it was a rather lengthy review too.
It was, and so I'll just read you sort of what it says here on the first page. It says that this is again the commander talking back to the operational command. It says, "You have tasked me to provide an assessment of the Gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the Gateway process, I needed to do enough supportive research and analysis to fully understand how and why this process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be extremely involved and a very difficult business. Initially, based on conversations with a physician who took the Gateway training with me, I had recourse to biomedical models developed by a man named Itov Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to delve into various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and function of human consciousness. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemispheric synchronization technique employed by the Gateway process. Once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of time, space, and its dimensions, and the means by which human consciousness can expand and transcend it, and achieving the Gateway objectives. Finally, I found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of out-of-body states into a language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and to put it in a frame of reference suitable for objective assessment."
I love how you said to remove the occult connotations.
Yeah.
That he put that in there. I remember reading that too.
Yeah, I mean, he just in that very first paragraph, he's saying it works. We want to remove the occult connotation. We wanted to prove it scientifically in order for it to be more, more practical, so that we can understand it, and use it. I mean, right there, occult is in the very first, paragraph, and this is talking about, quantum mechanics and, physics and trying to them knowing what they knew, but they were trying to explain how it was working.
Yes. I was going to read something that he wrote in here. It says under Gateway and Hemisync.
Mm-hmm.
This is from the same guy. What differentiates the Gateway experience from forms of meditation is its use of the Hemisync technique, which is defined in a monograph by Monroe Institute's trainer, Melissa Jagger, as a state of consciousness defined when the EEG patterns of both hemispheres are simultaneously equal in amplitude and frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Then she also says audio techniques developed by Bob Monroe can induce and sustain hemisync with the Institute's basic Focus 3 tapes, which Focus 3, if you were to look through it, is like kind of like still basic stuff.
Yeah.
Then it just basically, and then somebody, I think there was somebody who was like a Zen master and said that this was like what took him 20 years to get could be done in like a 15 minutes if once you know what you're doing with this stuff.
Exactly, and it so much revolves around that certain tones being exposed to the ears that produces this hemisync, this it's like synchronization of the brain. And it says in one of the third bullet points, it says that You are not you are not thinking, you are merely being logical. The physics of altered human consciousness deals with the conceptualization that are not easily grasped or visualized exclusively into the context of ordinary left brain linear thinking. So they explain that, during our waking life, everything is filtered through the left hand side of the brain. And they go on to explain how the right brain is the intuitive side, um, and how, in order for them to kind of have this whole thing possible, the only way is if you have the left hand and right hand side sync together, and
Exactly. Yeah.
then your brain waves are literally in harmony with each other, and
It even
then
goes into like something with the what is that called, the limen or whatever it is that's in between the two things. Like that has to like the way they described it. Almost swear to God is like kind of like as that being the veil, really, of like how
yeah,
that almost has to like I think vibrate and sync so they can both work.
right, and then it even and I find
And
it.
which you know what's funny that that's called a limen, but then secret societies have a lamen, which is like their symbol.
Mhm, yep,
I thought I was like, is that like a play off of words somehow?
yeah, yeah, that's a really
Because
good
that's what
point.
the OTO has. They have a lamen, which is
Right,
that that reptilian eye looking thing or whatever shape you want to call it. Yeah. There
yeah,
was
so
actually a thing that I wanted to read that was right not too long after what I just read that explains also how this works a little bit more that I thought was a total occult reference also, or how I could show a cult reference to it. It
mhm,
was did you read the part where it said lamp versus laser when it's talking about like basically like fine tuning?
yeah, yep,
Yeah, Melissa Jagger, this was another person that was involved with this stuff, used a metaphor to help clarify the process involved in the use of hemisync in the Gateway experience. She points out that the human mind in its natural state may be likened to an ordinary lamp, which expends energy in the forms of both heat and light, but it's chaotic. It's like going all over the place. Basically, what they're getting at is that with this stuff, you'll be able to fine tune that and like maybe actually like do specific stuff with it
mhm,
or like concentrate on specific things. It goes on to say the mind can then bring itself into synchronization with more sophisticated and rarefied energy levels in the universe.
mhm,
Now, if you've ever looked at, and I have a bunch of them, I could put them up on any of the hermit cards. Whenever they're holding the lamp, there I have never seen an actual flame in the
mhm,
lamp. It's always like some glowing orb, or it could be like some glowing hexagram, but it's never an actual flame. It looks more of like a light or a beam.
yeah,
Never seen an actual flame in any of those lamps.
yeah, and
I mean, unless it's like one of those, like not what an oracle card or some shit like that, where it's just all artsy shit, but like some like reputable tarot decks. I don't think there's a flame in any of them.
yeah, and the hermit card. I mean, that's associated with wisdom. That's associated with, you know, sort of
That's like a top card to if you wanted that'd be like for a magician. That's like something to aspire to.
exactly. Yeah, and then that card is all about gaining the wisdom of balancing yourself so that you are able to see things in a different light, right? So you're able to control your mind and your body and your emotions so that you become a more complete person, so you better understand yourself, know thyself, and that the wisdom is represented by the light,
Mhm.
seeking the light. And then it's, again, these are the metaphors that are used in the occult. They're breaking down the metaphor in a scientific way here. It's so
Yeah, that's what was so mind blowing about this to me.
right. And one thing I wanted to read here, it says that as they were doing an assessment of the system, they felt that it was necessary, after having complete analysis, to point out that the resulting conclusions do not do any violence to fundamental mainstream or either Western or Eastern belief systems. So when they were researching the Gateway Experience, the CIA and other groups, they were they were not they were trying to investigate different religions, different belief systems, and pull things from each one so that it could help them better understand from a scientific standpoint. Because a lot of messages are sort of all the same between religions, they just have a different way of saying it. They really got into like the hypnosis part of the Gateway Experience. They want to understand. The CIA wanted to understand what hypnosis, how it played a role in the hemisync, and so they have a whole outline here, and maybe we could put a picture of it up for our viewers. But the CIA has got it's a cross section of the brain, and it breaks down how the motor and sensory cortex are connected with the lateral ventricles. And they talk about how when the hemisync occurs, like you were talking about with the heart, again, another symbol so important to the occult, the heart.
Yeah, yes. I totally, for sure, have thought that it's always been an occult symbol, but even after reading this stuff, I find it even more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Because this document says that under the right conditions, that certain ventricles of the brain and the heart, when exposed to certain tones, will begin to syncopate with each other and come into unison, and that literally, like a certain, I think a unit where the what you saw the lamed opens up, and then
Yeah,
able to flow into different ventricles that would not normally be used.
yeah. See, that's why I think that starts getting into the whole crossing the veil in occultism.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, I mean, I mean, there's even if when you start getting into, I don't know how real Enochian magic may have been, but I mean, I have seen other forms of magic where it's almost like, now you have, when you start doing certain things, there's all these specific kind of pinpointed areas to go to do it,
Hmm.
which I start to wonder, is that are you really just talking about parts of the brain to contact for this
Yeah,
type of experience?
yeah, right. And
Just different chambers of the right hand side of the brain.
right. And I mean, and if we were to go into, they address all of the different effects um, of the that hypnosis and the different quadrants of the brain, and but if we were to cover all that, we would be here for hours. But
Yeah.
we will definitely uh, leave a link for this document in the description. Um, I mean,
Sure.
this document it's incredible. And it even talks about how how the right hand side of the brain and the right or the left hand side of the brain and the eyes and the way that you perceive light and patterns and just position of the cortex and like cerebral positioning, and I mean they get
Oh
scientific.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What I got out of it too is the whole point of the hemisync is getting your whole body's vibrational um to basically lower,
uh,
to then to match the earth's vibration.
right, right.
There's
But,
even parts of this stuff that's supposed to, the vibrational thing that, like, in your brain, is
hmm
even supposed to change uh how loud your heartbeat is going to be also, because then
yeah,
that's sound vibrating through your body. Like, this actually will is meant to even change that for the lower
yeah,
part of your body, for you to come in tune with the, was it 7 to 7.5 hertz to resonate with the earth's vibration.
and there we have seven. Seven is in the occult a very holy
Yeah.
number. It's considered a very special number, and you have to wonder then the reason why the seven was so prevalent in the occult is because of this hidden meaning. It says here that in this technique, in so they're talking about transcendental meditation, and they're talking about how transcendental meditation is sort of like an early way of, or more like you said, these Zen masters who study their whole life, and still they don't get. Some of them don't even get that far, no matter how hard that they try. But yet, in just a couple minutes, they're able to achieve this. And it says here that the reason why is because there seems to be a creation of acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to the gray matter in the cortex of the right side of the brain. As a result, these waves will stimulate and eventually polarize the cortex in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus. So, they explain here sort of how the vibration and the different tones and frequencies will begin to sync the brain. So they're giving a scientific analysis to hemisync, and then they go ahead and they switch topics a little bit, because what they begin to talk about of why the hemisync is so important is because that once. So I'll go ahead and read for everybody just the last two bullet points that they have here, and then we'll go ahead and finish up this episode, and we'll save the next for next week. But this will give you a good idea as to sort of where all of this goes in the future. So they say that in addition to being, so they explain as being, as you are steadily exposed to higher levels of frequency and amplitude, that you actually begin to syncopate with the Earth's electromagnetic sphere, is what they say. And they say the human body creates a surprisingly powerful carrier wave to assist the mind in the communication activity with other human minds similarly tuned. Before our explanation can proceed any further, it is essential to define the mechanism by which the human mind exercises the function known as consciousness, to describe the way in which that consciousness sort of deduces or translates the stimuli that it receives. So it says that the first point which needs to be made is that two terms, matter and energy, tend to be misleading if taken to indicate two different states of existence in the material world as we know it. They're talking about matter itself, and says that indeed, if the term matter is taken to mean a solid substance as opposed to energy, which is understood to mean a force of some sort, then the use of the former is entirely misleading. Science now knows that both electrons which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom and the nucleus itself are made of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. Solid matter in the strict construction of the atom simply does not exist. Solid matter in the strict construction of the term simply does not exist. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy fields. It talks about how these different fields, it gives you an entire breakdown of the different fields, 10 to the 22 hertz, 10 to the 15 hertz, and the,
Yeah. Well, I
the
was gonna say even the whole thing behind magic is really manipulating energy. And now
right.
if they're saying that everything is just basically vibrational energy and there really is nothing that's actually solid, well, I mean, there you go. That's the whole thing about magic then,
Right.
is being able to control all that.
Yup, and frequency and dimensional physics. I mean, we're really getting deep into it now. We're deep down the shitter, but like, I mean, this is what the occult would translate into. We are living on this vibrational plane, the third dimension, but it is possible to go to a higher dimension, the fourth dimension, and so on and so on. And that is what's illustrated in the Tree of Life.
This is basically a scientific explanation of that stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The whole thing behind the mystery of mysteries, if you know how to read the Kabbalah, right? Or have had experiences to be able to translate into it.
Yeah, yeah. They even say that the patterns of the way that you think affect me as a whole. I mean, the energy grids interact, and that is why you have so much intention in the occult. And ritualism in the occult. I mean,
I think that has a lot, a lot to do with just telling beginners to start with meditations. I mean, basically, like how we saw in the beginning. I mean, just to get to resonate with the Earth's vibrational field, you would have to, be pretty good with meditation already.
right.
And that's like the first thing that anybody who knows anything about magic or actually practices it or has like a good system going, they will all tell you, as boring as this is going to sound, spend your first few months just learning how to meditate before you do anything else. Because that's how important it really is in magic.
Yeah, that in the intention, or even being able to clear the mind totally. And for a magician, I mean, so much of our magic is revolves around intention, 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 and it really doesn't matter what type of magic you're doing. The intention, the will, is the most important part.
In clearing your mind completely, like that's kind of like more, in my opinion, more of like actual like really gangster type of meditation.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, just focusing on the same type of thought most people may not realize is a form of meditation, or focusing on a specific shape in your head or a specific color. So you don't even have to be all that great of like some experience, advanced meditation type person. You just have to be able to at least hold a thought of something. It doesn't have to be nothing. It'd be something, which
Hmm.
is a lot easier than nothing. And that will even make breakthroughs for people.
Yeah, right. And I mean, this document right here, what's so funny about this is that it's saying that my thoughts affect you, and your thoughts affect me, and our thoughts affect everyone else, and that doesn't that now explain why the world is in the state that it is. I mean, the people
Exactly.
who know this information, they're using it to achieve goals because look at the way that the world is. Our world is being pointed in, or our future is in like a certain path now because of thought patterns of people.
They obviously know what they're doing and how to do it just from
Yep.
reading this.
And probably how to influence the masses to get certain thought patterns. So, so many thought patterns going that it determines what path the future kind of goes down.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's just sort of the first couple pages of the Gateway Experience, the analysis by the CIA. And next week we'll pick it back up, and to give you sort of a little sneak into where this document goes, the next subject that this document covers is called the consciousness matrix.
Yeah, I think that was pretty good, man. Some pretty interesting
Yep.
shit for sure. I guess we'll wrap that up here. And as always, like I say at the end of every video, if you liked it, please like, subscribe, pass it on. Oh, and that we do have a Gab TV channel now. You can check us out on. Add to the comments. You can, wherever you see it posted, throw something up, add to it. Get
Mm-hmm.
involved if you want.
And
All
like
that
if
stuff.
anybody has done research on this, specifically this document too, definitely reach out to us because I mean they're talking about really heavy stuff here, and we don't try and make it seem scientific or boring or like too like nerdy, but I mean this is the way that the CIA is describing this stuff, so it sort of gives us a more scientific approach to understanding the occult. So if anybody out there knows, maybe is like an expert in any of those fields, reach out to us.
Yes, definitely, please. And that wraps it up right there. I guess until the next one.
See ya.
Later.